So this is the beginning of a series of videos in which I'm going to be addressing or trying to address the full studio catalog of Peter Hammill, which, if you know anything about Peter Hammill, is a hell of a job, right? So I wanted to just kind of start by talking about why I'm taking this on and what format I'm going to put it in. So my name is Hans Berger. I'm the main writer and arranger for Electric Brain, Electric Shadow, which is a musical project based in progressive rock, combining elements of psychedelia, ambient, post-punk, post-rock, etc., right? And I make this music as a home-recorded project. I might get other people involved sometimes, but what I'm trying to do is make something that's fairly ambitious, fairly complex, at home with a limited set of tools. And Hamill was really the first to do that, right? Now, obviously, in my time, the tools are readily available to make something complex as a lone individual, right? So there's a level of challenge that he faced that, of course, I don't have to. But he is still, I think, one of the patron saints of the dogged individual musician. And that's in spite of course, also having been in one of the best bands of the progressive era. And that same ambition, that same work ethic have continued to make him incredibly prolific and focused right up until today. So he's released an album every year or two for decades, while also bringing in new sounds and ideas and themes, and almost never in a way that feels like he's pandering or like he's trying to imitate something else or like he's trying to fit into the zeitgeist, right? I can't think of anybody who surpasses him in terms of consistent focus and discipline as an artist. You could argue that there may have been a few who've equaled. Marquis Smith, Frank Zappa come to mind, but none, I think, that have surpassed. And I think the scale of that overall body of work really elevates the individual pieces. Once you're really getting involved with his work, once you are immersed in his way of singing and writing and arranging and thinking about composition and performance, then it does become appealing to dig into everything he's done. And it's exciting to understand the amount of what's there, right? And any individual song or album, even if it is mediocre or underwhelming on its own, becomes more intriguing when it's part of such a massive puzzle, right? When you're trying to figure out what it says about such a large body of work. But one, I think, inevitable side effect of that ambition is that his catalog is really imposing for a new listener. You know, I have loved Van der Graaf Generator since I was a teenager, but it took years for me to approach his solo work because there's just so goddamn much of it. And because, you know, there's a lot of attention given to the 70s work, but there's not as much critical material about the albums from the 80s forward, right? They're not included in the On Track book. They have fewer and less detailed reviews on Prog Archives or All Music Guide. Usually on the forums, if somebody asks about approaching the Hamill solo stuff, they're advised to begin with the 70s work. And that's probably good advice, but still, I wanted to take a shot at making a more comprehensive resource that addresses every era. And also, as someone who is fairly familiar with the whole solo catalog, I think there's all kinds of room here for discussion among more experienced listeners about those albums' merits and qualities and points of interest. And a lot of that's already occurring in the prog community, but there's, I think, always room for more. Here on YouTube, Darren Locke's video, The Peter Hammill Primer, is a good introductory resource. It's maybe a bit less detailed in scope than what I'm hoping to do, but it's probably also more immediately approachable and watchable than maybe this series of videos. So that's a good thing to check out if you want other Hamill content on YouTube. Now, for the sake of making this manageable, I'm going to avoid talking about live albums. Those are definitely worth checking out. Live performance is a significant part of the work and the legacy, but we're talking here about 40 or so albums by my count, even if we're just restricting ourselves to the studio work. So here's the structure of what I'm going to do. I have broken up his catalog by decade, and I'm going to rank the albums within each decade and provide a capsule review. In some cases, I've fudged the lines a bit. If there are clear stylistic divides that might arrive a little bit before or a little bit after the literal decade mark. But in general, the decades have happened to coincide with trends in the work. I also want to say now what it is that I find appealing about Hamill, because that's going to have some impact on how I'm thinking about what is succeeding, what's not working, why one thing might be put ahead of another. When Hamill is firing on all cylinders, there's a few things that he can do at once, right? As a lyricist, he can write things that are philosophically and intellectually rich, but at the same time have engaging narratives and vivid images. He's a passionate performer, he's a completely unique vocalist, and in his best solo work, he can build very effective arrangements out of modest tools, simple techniques, particularly in ways which involve very creative or strange use of vocal overdubs. And when he wants to, he can also be a hell of a melodicist. His best work is very catchy. His best melodies have a quality of immediate familiarity and timelessness. So his best work is emotionally and intellectually compelling in equal measure, and is melodically appealing, and just really doesn't sound like anything else. But one side effect of the scope of that body of work is, frankly, he's not always maximizing all those elements at once. So, for instance, he has several albums that are primarily instrumental, right? And those might be more or less appealing in their own right, but they're not necessarily making use of his really remarkable and exceptional talents as a singer and a lyricist. In some cases, maybe some of the albums aren't as successful because he's working with a new tool or a new technique that he hasn't totally figured out yet. Some of the mid to late 80s work is quite guilty of that. And in some cases, it might just be that the sheer quantity of work that he's done inevitably dictates that there are going to be a few duds. Anyway, so now you know what my overall project is. Once I have all the decades finished, I'm going to culminate with a video that picks 10 highlights from the course of his career, which will collectively track the arc of his vision and achievement. That'll be a proposed entryway for someone who is new to the solo work, but wants a cross-section of the whole kind of scope of what he's done, rather than just to start with the 70s material. So if you're somebody who's interested in Peter Hammill, either as a new listener or as somebody who's familiar with the catalog and wants to hear another fan blab about it, then I do hope you'll join me. Like, subscribe, comment, whatever. Check out Electric Brain, Electric Shadow on Spotify, Bandcamp, anywhere else you get your music.